Well, thank you guys. It's good to be here with you. I haven't been here before, so thank you for calling me fresh material, not fresh meat. That was nice. I could see that's what you wanted to say, so but you didn't. So yeah. Anyway, good to be with you guys. Good to see you. Yeah, I get the privilege of being an assistant pastor over at Calvary Murietta, and I grew up there, which was really kind of nice. So I started there when I was 10, yeah, it's very much home. So it's a lot of guys who kind of are assistant pastors. They move a lot, even in a lot of denominations, right? They move. Hey, we're sending you to Kansas. We're sending you to, wherever, whatever state. And so I've gotten to grow up and see the community change, see the place change, and so it's been special to have it be home for me. I don't know most of you, and so I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir today, but choirs need to be preached to as well. So I'm not going to share my full testimony. It would take a long time, but maybe an aspect of it. And so I was sitting there and I was like, what story am I trying to tell? I've been trying to figure out, what am I trying to say? And I think it's the story of God sucking some self-righteousness out of me. And so I think that always resonates with all of us. And so in 2017, November 2017, I found myself standing over a pile of little girls' underwear, lecturing them in Spanish. And you would have thought that I was having a mental breakdown, but I will give you a little context and you'll go, oh, this is just where God had you that afternoon. It was a weird afternoon for me. So I had, if I back up 1 year, so that was November 2017, I'm speaking Spanish to underwear, losing my mind. A year before that, I had approached our missions pastor and I said, hey, I feel like I know about everything about how our church works except for maintenance and missions. And I don't really want to go learn all about maintenance. And so I would like to go learn about missions. And you guys talk about this stuff and you have this vocabulary and you took this class. I'd like to go take that class. So I would drive down every week, and I'd drive down to San Diego, down to El Cajon, and I took this class on missions. Not really my topic today, but as I was taking it, I had to write a paper at the end. And I've always liked school. I've always kind of been into academics. And so I was like, I'm going to write the longest version of the paper. That they had different tiers you could take. And so I was like, I need to take it at the top. And to take it at the top, I had to write this pretty beefy paper. And to write a pretty beefy paper, I had to have material. And it had to be on an ethnic group. And I couldn't get any material. I couldn't write a paper that was 20 pages long because I couldn't find any information. And so I was going, group by group and kind of crossing all these ethnic groups off my list, and I went, well, my pastor, he keeps talking about this one. They're called the Rohingya. Maybe I'll write on that because he seems into that. I'll write on that. It's in the news. Maybe I could get enough to write a paper. I was still in paper mode, and I couldn't find any material, but there was a gentleman who had come to the class to just kind of share about his ministry, and he worked with refugees from the same country there in San Diego. And so I got his number from the class coordinator, and I said, hey, can I give him a call? And I just need I need some research. I don't have enough to write my paper with. And so I called him up the day before Thanksgiving, and I said, hey, I don't have any material on the Rohingya people. I know they're from your country. Do you have any cultural material that you could share with me? Could I chat with you? And he goes, oh, you want to meet Rohingya people? And I said, are there some? And he goes, oh yes, there are many. Can you come tomorrow? And I said, well, tomorrow's Thanksgiving for me. Can I come? I'll come the next day. So I went down to San Diego the next day, and he introduced me to a man named Hobby. Hobby had fled from, some pretty dire persecution in his country. He had a little son named Kairul, who was 10 years old, and I built a relationship with Hobby. At first, it was me interviewing him, and I just wanted information. He was just a source for me to write this paper, and I was in journalism mode, and so I'm trying to write my paper. And I got to know him more as a person. I kept going down. I'd go down probably every week, and I'd interview him and talk with him. And eventually he got sick, and he was in the hospital. I didn't know about it until a little bit after. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's just him and his son. There's no one else. And I thought, who took care of your son while you were in the hospital? You don't have a support network. There was a neighbor lady, another refugee lady. She ended up taking care of Kairul, but I thought, gosh, I would have loved to be able to step in and take care of your son, who has there's no one around like that for him, and it really kind of broke my heart, which was odd because I've seen a lot of things that maybe should break my heart. And you know, when something just kind of hits you and you're like, oh, that was something about that hit me. I don't know why. It's not more important than something else necessarily. It just hit me. And so I kept kind of building relationship with him, and then we were at church one day. There's a organization here in Temecula called ICA, and they do a lot of international adoptions and things like that. And they said, hey, we're doing this thing, and we need people, we need families. It's for foster care for refugee kids who don't have any parents. And I was like, it was like a laser hit me. You know, it's funny. I've been at church since I was a baby. I've heard every announcement for everything, and you know, sometimes it's like, that's cool, someone else can do that, right? That's cool, but someone else can do that. That's cool, someone else. Whenever they would announce children's ministry, I was like, not me. I don't do that. I've never done that, and I will not do that. But this one was like, it was like just a laser on me again. And I thought, this is what something about this. And so I told my wife, can we go to that meeting? And so we went, and for whatever reason, she's like, yes, let's do it. Which was we're pretty mellow. Like, we're really mellow. If you haven't really met me much, if you've met my wife, like, we are very chill. Let's relax. It's all good. Like, let's just hang out. Like, let's make life simple and easy. I always tell people, when I was a kid, we would play Oregon Trail. For some reason, my education, I don't know why, but every week we got to go to the library, and our library time, you got to grab a book, and then you played Oregon Trail. And if you're not familiar, it's a video game where apparently you're supposed to learn about the history of the Oregon Trail. But in reality, you pick, like, how much do I want to spend on ammunition to shoot buffalo? And how much do I want to bring my own food and not have to shoot a buffalo? And then, oh no, my son got typhoid and died. Like, it's kind of that, it was a great game in the 90s. And I remember the game would always start and they would say, okay, you're a banker in Boston. And I was like, great, I quit. Let's just do that. Like, that sounds good. I don't need to go to Oregon. Like, I always thought, man, if this were me, I would do the easiest, simplest, quietest thing that I could do. I'd just be a banker in Boston, no problem. And so we ended up, long story short, because it is a long story, we ended up signing up. We did this. We got our first foster kids, and they had been sent from El Salvador on a train by themselves, 6 years old and 11 years old. And they came, and they were, this little girl, Gabby, she was the toughest 6-year-old I've ever met. She was tough. She bit me a few times. The day after we got her, she locked herself in the Target dressing room and wouldn't come out. She would run away. She'd lock herself in my car. She was so tough. She was so difficult. And I had to come to realize that Gabby had learned to protect herself by being really tough at 6 years old. And Gabby had learned she's not safe. Gabby had learned the hard way that this is how you deal with people. And she would just, all day long, every day, it was just difficult. And so at one point, she had just taken all her underwear and she just threw them all over the ground, which was actually pretty light pretty light. And my natural instinct was, I just want to, like, yell at, discipline, time out, whatever a normal thing I would do. Take away, okay, no popsicle, no park time, whatever thing I would try. And something in me goes, you need to lighten this up. You need to lighten you're building all this tension. You're building all this tension. Gabby's just tense. And I've always kind of enjoyed humor. And so I was like, okay, instead of lecturing Gabby, I'm going to lecture the underwear. And I have to do it in Spanish because that's what Gabby speaks. My Spanish is not great, but I can give a lecture to some girls' underwear. And so I'm standing over a pile of underwear. Underwear, you should be in the drawer. Why are you on the floor? You don't live on the floor. What are you doing? How did you get here? Get back in your drawer, underwear. And she just starts laughing, and it was like, boom. Where did that come from for me? I've never raised a child. I never did children's ministry. I don't even know if that was the right thing to do, but in the moment, the Lord was going, Gabby's not the enemy. Gabby's not your opposition. Gabby's wounded. Gabby's scared. Gabby's trying to control you because she can't control things. Gabby got shipped here on a train by herself with her brother, with a coyote. This is the little, you're dealing with a little girl. Lighten up. Lighten this up. And the Lord just retaught me, I guess, how to do that. You guys who've been fathers, you're like, I don't know how to be a father. The Lord parents you, right? Some of you guys had bad examples of a father, bad examples, but the Lord goes, I'm your example. I can teach you. I can tell you what to do. What was interesting to me was, I'll be honest, I had a really tough time with the issue of immigration and the issue of folks coming to our country. I had a really hard time with that, and I would write papers about it in college about why this isn't right and what we should how I should be against it. And the Lord then goes, okay, Andrew, I have a joke for you. You're going to meet and care for these people, and we did it again and again. I had a gentleman at church come up to me and say, I have a hard time with what you're doing. But he goes, but then I met those kids and I realized how vulnerable they were, how little they were, how much they need. And he goes, and I'm struggling now. And I said, I'm struggling too. It's not simple for me, but we did this for a gospel reason. Our next two boys were from Guatemala. And as they were leaving our house, they stayed for quite a while. As they were leaving, I sat them down, and again, my not great Spanish, and I wanted to share with them why we had even done this, why we brought them in. I wanted to make sure I shared the gospel with them. And I said, now, do you boys know why we open our doors here to people? And it was funny because I used the phrase open our doors, and the one of them says, I think we open the door to let in more light into the house. And I said, oh, no. I meant, why do we welcome people in? And I shared, because Jesus always welcomes us, right? Jesus always welcomes us into his house. And so it was such a beautiful thing. One of them, a little boy, 7 years old, and he would drive around the back of my car and he'd sing, gracias te doy, Señor, gracias te doy, Jesús. I give you thanks, Lord. I give you thanks, Jesus. And to hear his little voice, I recorded him one day. I don't know if it was legal. I recorded him singing because I wanted to have that recording because I knew he'd be leaving us. And so the Lord really used them. We had another boy from Eritrea in Africa. And use them to make me meet somebody and go, oh, you're a person who needs the Lord. You're a person who needs help. Our next foster son was coming to us, and what was really interesting was I didn't know until the day before he arrived that he was from that Rohingya group, the one that I'd been researching, the one that that our church actually ended up later trying to adopt and target with the gospel and be strategic with and build relationships with overseas. And at first he wouldn't even step foot at our church. He had a superstition that he couldn't even get out of the car. He couldn't walk in. And he was with me for 5 years, to the point where I could share the gospel, to the point where I could push. And he would say, well, I'd say, how come Muslims don't read the gospel like they say they will? And he says, well, maybe we do. And I said, I've never met one. And we could push like that. And he'd say, well, the gospel's, it's like the Quran. They're basically the same. I said, well, have you ever read the gospel? No. I said, how do you know they're the same? He goes, they're very similar. And I said, but how do you know? And he stops and he looks at me and he goes, you're right. How do I know? And so we would go back and forth. I found myself using cups to try to explain the Trinity, and I'm pouring water in cups, and I'm like, this is probably heresy at some point, but Lord, what do you have me doing here? I'm lecturing underwear, I'm pouring water in cups, trying to explain the Trinity to a Muslim. And one day I said, hey, I gotta go to church. We have prayer tonight. I said, actually, we're praying tonight for the Rohingya people. We have a prayer time for Rohingya. And he goes, can I come? I was like, you don't even step foot in church. He's all, well, if you're praying for my people, can I come and sit and listen? I said, yeah, come and sit. Listen, Rick, I don't know where Rick DeLeon went, but he was there that night. It was a cool thing. Most people didn't know, I think, that he was there. Same thing the Lord did in my life when I went to college. I went to UCR and I studied religion. And when you study religion, it was always in your face. Professors would be like, what do you believe? And why do you believe that? And it was always out front, always, and not always oppositional. Some were. I remember one, you get the whole class to just laugh at something in Christianity. He would often misquote the Bible and misquote Christianity, but get everybody riled up about how stupid my religion was. And so I learned how and when to say something, and I learned how to play the game. But what I really learned, the best thing I learned, was on the sidelines, you'd hear people's real stories. I remember a guy who was a biology student, because UCR is mainly a science school, and they'd ask you like, why are you taking this class? And you know, I'd say, well, it's part of my major, like I have to take this class. And I remember him saying, well, I'm looking for something to believe, and I just figured I'd come here and try this, you know, looking for anything to believe. I remember a girl in a class on Jesus, which was the toughest one I took, because it was not a pro-Jesus class on Jesus. It was the academic study of the history of the historical Jesus and the Gospels, and it put me on my toes. But this girl raised her hand, and she's asking the professor about her lack of faith, and what does it mean if I'm doubting my faith? And he looks so uncomfortable, and he goes, I think you should ask maybe like a religious leader or a pastor that. This is an academic setting. And I knew that, and she probably knew that, but she didn't know where else to turn. This was, for her, this was the best place she could go. I remember a guy who was an atheist in another class, and when I questioned him and talked with him and got down to it, it was because my dad had gotten so sick in the hospital he almost died, and why would God let that happen? It wasn't intellectual, it wasn't the things he was talking about in class, it was something deeper, it was something human. I remember a girl from Bangladesh, Tabassum was her name, and she told me, we were partnered in a class together for a project, and she said, I'm beginning to have doubts. I'm beginning to have doubts about Islam, and I don't know what do I do with that, and how do I know if that's true? And so I think what the Lord let me do was see these people that when I went to college, they were the bad people. And he let me meet them, and he let me get to know them, and he let me get to see them through a really different lens. And then the Lord made me realize that that super liberal, pain in the butt, want to smack that person in the face professor, that's me except for Jesus. That would be me except for Jesus. I don't know if you ever think about or you look back at, who was I without Jesus? I go, I'm the professor in the class getting everybody to laugh at Christian. That exactly would be me. That would be my whole God would be academics. I would have a PhD. I would be a professor, and I would be trying to get people to see how stupid religion was, because that's a big part of my testimony. Is I doubted my faith really strongly for those intellectual reasons. Can I believe this? Why do I believe this? How do I believe this? Can I trust God? And then when I was in junior high, my mom died, and so then it was, why is this God's not a good God? So I was in that same place as that atheist guy. I understood him super well. His dad lived, my mom died, but at the same time the question was the same, saying, I believe in God now, but he's not good. So do I want to believe in him? Right? There was a realization in me that I was the same. As the Lord's worked on me and he's worked on my self-righteousness, I've realized that for me, for so long, God's a rule giver, but he was just a rule giver to me. And when he's just a rule giver, you'll judge yourself and everybody else by, am I keeping the rules, and are you keeping the rules? And the problem was I wasn't keeping the rules. And so God just seemed so stern and so cold and so distant, because I couldn't keep his rules. Even as a Christian, even as walking and chilling and I did youth ministry, and I was nice, and you would have liked me, and I was, yay, Andrew. But I didn't really follow the Lord with my whole heart. I still don't follow the Lord with my whole heart. But nevertheless, at the time, the Lord I didn't follow with my whole heart was a God of rules. And so then I looked out at a world that wasn't keeping his rules, and they were worse than me. When it's a God of rules, we compare ourselves to other. You may remember Jesus tells this parable about a Pharisee and a tax collector. And he quotes the Pharisee. What he has the Pharisee say, I think, is so poignant. He says, the Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, and even this tax collector. That was me. I'm not like other people, right? I'm either better than other people or I'm worse than other people. Everything in my life compared with other people. Are they worse than me, better than me, worse than me, better than me, worse than me, better than me? I'm like that tax collector. His is out of pride, and mine half the time was out of pride. And half the time it was out of shame, right? Oh, I'm worse than them. But half the time it was, oh, I'm better than them. And I still have that in me. I'll read articles and it's like, kids these days don't read. And I'm like, well, I read, so I'm good. People these days, they don't understand the Bible. I understand the Bible, so I'm good. I don't care if you don't know the Lord. I know the Lord. I'm comfy, I'm good, I'm happy. And that's something that the Lord, I think, has been trying to suck out of me with a syringe, because it doesn't come out very easily. I have learning that I am not the hero of my story. When I compare myself to other people and I'm either better or worse than them, it puts me as the hero. And the Lord of the last few years has been showing me in the way I read the Bible that I'm not the hero of the Bible. The Bible does not center on, begin with, and end with me. It begins with, ends with, and centers on Jesus, and from Him come all blessings for me. So am I better than them? Am I better than other people? Am I better than the people who sometimes with those foster placements, the people I have a hard time? I realize the Lord says you don't forgive the people who put these kids in these positions. So you still think you're better than them because you do foster care and they put kids into foster care. The reality is, but for Jesus, I'm not better than the child abuser. I'm not better than the person who puts their kid on a train. I'm not better than the trafficker who gets the kid off the train. I'm not better than them, but for Jesus. A guy I like named Brian Higgins says and this is an exact quote, but it's just a thing that he often says. He says, the people we think of as enemies are not our enemies. They're deceived by the enemy. They're deceived by the enemy. Ephesians is clear that our real enemy is the devil and his minions and his forces and his system, which those who are part of the system are abused by that system. In 1 Peter 2:11, it says, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which war against your soul. What's interesting is we can go, okay, yeah, passions. And often as men, we jump to things like lust. That is a passion. The word in Greek is epithumia, this overwhelming, it's an overwhelming desire. It could be for all kinds of stuff. It's not focused just on sexual lust. But he's saying, hey, you're sojourners, you're exiles. You don't belong in this world. And this world, and even sometimes our own sinful hearts, cultivate so much anger towards the people of the world. We are no longer acting as sojourners in the world because they're not where, again, am I better than them or worse than them? Better than them or worse than them? Well, with Jesus, you're probably better than them. But without Jesus, you're the same as them. You're the same as them, and so am I. In Ephesians 2, Paul says that we are God's workmanship. Some of you guys are probably craftsmen. I am not. I couldn't even do arts and crafts as a kid. I'd always be the last one done. And I'm still gluing the glue stick to the paper. And they're like, we're not even gluing glue sticks to paper. We're making pine cone animals. Like, I don't know what Andrew's doing over there. My dad and brother are like, my brother fixes airplanes. My dad worked at Guidant doing, making sure your heart doesn't die when I put this in your body. And I never got that gene. But some of you guys did, right? You have workmanship, you know craftsmanship, you fix things, you make things work. My closest, would be probably writing. Writing would be my best form of art. But God is saying you're God's best form of art, right? You're His craftsmanship. You're His poem is the Greek word. Created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. My senior pastor, Brian, changed the way I saw that. I always saw that and I went, oh yeah, good work. Like in general, like we should do good things. Like in general, I'm sure there's an old lady somewhere who needs help across the street somewhere, which I've never actually seen, but like I think out there generically somewhere we should do good things. And he goes, no, Andrew, I think that means specifically God has people to put in your path. God has relationships for you to build. God has stories for you. God has things He's putting in front of you that you need to say yes to, because as men, we seek purpose and we seek adventure. And those are great things that God put in our hearts, but sometimes the purpose and the adventure are just the people that He brings, and you just say yes to those people. I had to learn when I was learning, am still learning, that God is not just only a rule giver and nothing more. I've had to learn to enjoy God. I was taking a walk. I used to walk every Wednesday morning because I would work late because we do church Wednesday nights. I'd come in a little late, so I'd walk around my neighborhood Wednesday mornings. And I was listening to a podcast, and it was a lady talking about how she had left the church, left kind of all the faith she'd grown up with. And she was saying, but there's something about it that I miss. Something about it I enjoyed. Even though I've walked away from it, I miss something about it. And I was walking through a garden, an orchard of orange trees. I just stopped and I prayed and I said, Lord, I haven't left. I haven't walked away from your church. And I still have lost a lot of the joy that I used to have in you. I still see you as cold. I still can't seem to access that. Would you return some of that to me? I got to church that day. I'm walking in my office and I realized I had a voicemail I hadn't attended to from a couple days prior. Just sort of forgot about it. It was from our foster agency. They call us all the time. You don't have this document. Can you update your car insurance info with us? Like, we need to check your freezer. Like, to have a missed voicemail from them was no big deal. So I check it, but this time it's somebody I don't know from the agency. So I go upstairs, I get in my office, I call her back, and she goes, "Hey, we have this program. I don't know if you'd be interested." And I was about to say, no more programs. No more. We can only take what we can take. We can only do what we can do. Please, no more. And she goes, "Well, it's for an infant adoption. We never talk about it because we don't have any infants. But now we have an infant and we don't have anybody, and so we need. Would you be even interested?" And I was like, I don't think so. I told her no, because my wife and I, we were like, hey, let's do maybe embryo adoption. My wife really wanted to have a baby. We never could have a baby, right? That was part of our story. Part of my story was I'm a little convoluted. I realize I ramble. Someone told me the other day, like, you're the most scatterbrained teacher, but I apologize. I was driving through the desert, listening to worship music. Never drive through the desert and listen to worship music because, I think the Lord will just appear in your car with you when you do. It's like the magic formula. So I was driving home from Phoenix one day. I was praying, and when you pray for something, and then all of a sudden it felt like the Lord was saying, ask me for what you want. I don't know if you've ever had that moment where the Lord's like, okay, now's the time. And lay your cards out. And I said, okay, Lord, I'm gonna lay my cards out. Would you give us a healthy baby by this time next year? And I kept driving, and I drove home, and the time that we would have had a baby by that time next year had long passed. I was like, all right, God, maybe next year. I get this phone call, and she goes, well, do you want to do this? And I said, I don't know. I called my wife up. She goes, well, get some more info. And we ended up, we put in our profile. The family picked us. We got to adopt this little girl, and what we learned later was that the head of the agency goes to our church, was sitting in church behind us one day, couldn't think. They don't have a ton of people. They have to go with their people. She's like, I don't even know who to ask. And she looks over, and me and my wife are sitting there, and she texts her employee and says, don't tell them I said this, because it's not really the way that we do things, but basically call this couple, ask them if they're interested. They're from a different program, but ask them if they're interested. The sermon that Sunday was on the Egyptian midwives who couldn't have children, and the Lord blessed them. And my wife is sitting there as she's trying not to cry because this is so devastating to her. And it's that same Sunday, this lady goes, oh, I'll text them. She called us the next day. I didn't get there. Okay, I'll finish. I am about to finish. Anyway, what we learned was that the Lord will put you in wild situations just when you say yes. In Romans 15, Paul's writing to the Romans, and he says, when I come to you, I know it'll be in the fullness of the glory of Christ. He got there in chains. He got what he wanted, but it didn't look like what he wanted, right? I got there in chains. God just kept saying yes and teaching me something when we said, yes, Lord, we'll meet whoever you have for us to meet. We'll go. Not because we're awesome, but because the Lord uses us when we say yes. We just got a call last night. I almost made a panic call to Steve last night. They told us, can you come to the hospital tonight? There's a baby who, we'd like to put with you. Then fortunately they changed it to later today. And so later today we'll get our next one. And it's just like, wow, Lord, you have such amazing things to do in our lives when we just say, okay, yes. Can I meet the people that you have to put? Can I realize that God works through the people we least expected him to work through in our lives. Let me pray super quick because I know I'm probably way over time. Lord, I pray that you would just speak whatever you have to speak to us. We thank you, Lord, that when I look out and I see sometimes enemies, Lord, you loved me when I was your enemy, and you love us. You made us your sons. And so, God, I pray that you would continue to humble me, suck out my self-righteousness, and for us all the same. Lord, I pray that you would introduce us to somebody that we never thought we'd meet, put us in a situation we never thought we'd be in, put us somewhere where we think, how did I even get here? And Lord, I thank you for every story. I don't even know, sitting here, where you've done that already, maybe over and over and over again. We thank you for your hand that guides us into the places you have for us to go, even when it's not what we expected, not what we wanted, not what we thought we were signing up for. And so, God, we just put ourselves before you this morning and ask for you to do what you have for us today and this year. Amen.